Christian Whitaker stepped into the Malibu house like a man returning to claim what was already his. Behind him stood Lauren Carter, her teenage son Ethan, and her mother Denise, watching quietly as Christian gestured toward Paula Whitaker as if she were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. "You should start packing," he said calmly. "This house is moving on. And so am I." Paula did not argue. She simply stood there. Across the room, a real estate attorney and a buyer's representative exchanged a brief glance. Christian didn't notice. He also didn't know the papers had already been signed that morning. The Whitaker house, valued at $20 million, no longer belonged to him. Before we continue, take a moment to tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. Stories like this travel across cities, time zones, and quiet living rooms where people understand something simple. Dignity doesn't shout, but it endures. If you believe that patience, truth, and quiet strength eventually reveal themselves, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next in Paula Whitaker's story. Long before the house in Malibu became a battleground, no one saw coming. It had been known simply as the Whitaker house. From the outside, the Whitakers were the kind of couple that magazines liked to photograph and charities liked to invite. Christian Whitaker was a real estate developer whose projects dotted the California coastline. Sleek glass towers and Santa Monica boutique hotels in Laguna Beach. Quiet luxury renovations in old neighborhoods that had suddenly become fashionable again. He had a reputation for knowing how to see value where others saw nothing. Paula Whitaker, his wife of 16 years, rarely stood at the center of those photographs. When reporters visited the house, it was usually Christian who spoke about market's development trends or architectural preservation. But the house itself, an ocean-facing estate built in the late 1920s, had survived nearly a century not because of Christian. It had survived because of Paula. Before she married Christian, Paula Whitaker had been an architectural historian working with preservation groups along the California coast. She knew the language of old buildings, the way some people understood music. She noticed things others missed, the slope of original beams, the imported Spanish tiles hidden beneath modern flooring, the way ocean salt slowly worked its way into untreated iron. When the Whitakers purchased the property 12 years earlier, most people had seen a crumbling mansion with impossible maintenance costs. Paula had seen something else entirely. She had seen a house worth saving. Over the next decade, she oversaw every restoration detail, working with craftsmen, historians, and structural engineers. Christian paid the contractors, but Paula understood the structure itself. In quiet ways, the house became her work. And like most things Paula did, she documented everything. Notebooks filled one cabinet in her study, timelines, renovation invoices, preservation reports, inspection records, property tax filings. Paula had always believed that memory alone was unreliable. Records were better. Christian sometimes joked about it at dinner parties. My wife archives everything he would say with a smile that made guests laugh. If civilization collapses, Paula will still have the paperwork. Paula usually smiled politely when he said that, but she never corrected him, because Christian believed the documentation was simply one of her harmless habits. What he never realized was that Paula didn't keep records for nostalgia. She kept them because information once organized could become power. For most of their marriage, however, she never needed to use that power. The first 10 years of their life together had been busy but stable. Christian traveled often for work, but Paula understood the rhythms of real estate development. Deals took months, sometimes years. Meetings happened in different cities. Absence was normal. What changed slowly and almost invisibly were the gaps between Christian's explanations and the details Paula noticed around them. It started with small things. A trip that extended 2 days longer than originally planned. A dinner reservation appearing on a credit card statement in a city where Christian had supposedly been attending a conference banquet. A late-night phone call where unfamiliar background noise carried faintly through the speaker. None of it proved anything. But Paula had spent most of her life studying structures both physical and historical, and she knew something about fractures. At first, fractures rarely appeared as dramatic breaks. They appeared as stress lines. One evening, about 4 months before the Malibu house would quietly change ownership, Christian mentioned a new trip. "I'll be in Aspen next week," he said casually over dinner. Paula was sitting at the long wooden table near the open glass doors that overlooked the Pacific. The evening wind moved gently through the curtains. "A conference?" she asked. "Real estate summit," Christian replied. "Investors, developers, the usual crowd. How long? 10 days, maybe 11. Paula nodded and returned to her plate. Christian didn't notice the moment she glanced toward the kitchen counter where his phone lay charging. Not because she intended to look through it, but because she had already seen something earlier that afternoon. A confirmation email had appeared briefly on his screen while he was in the shower. She hadn't opened the phone. She didn't need to. Years of careful documentation had trained her to remember details quickly. The email header had read, "Four Seasons Resort Maui at Wailea Reservation confirmed." Aspen, Paula knew, was in Colorado. Maui was not. Still, she said nothing. When Christian left the following week, he kissed her goodbye the same way he always had, quickly, distractedly, with one hand already reaching for his car keys. "Don't wait up tonight," he said. Early flight. Paula stood in the doorway of the house and watched the car disappear down the long coastal road. Then she went inside. The first thing she did was open her laptop. Not to search for hotels, not to track flights. Instead, she opened a new folder in the document archive she had maintained for years. She named it simply April Travel Christian. Inside that folder, she created several subfolders: flights, expenses, calls, images. It wasn't suspicion that drove her. Not exactly. It was curiosity. Over the next few days, small pieces of information began appearing naturally. Credit card alerts, automatic receipts, calendar discrepancies. Christian had always believed Paula paid little attention to his financial activity. In their marriage, he managed most of the major investments and business decisions. Paula handled household logistics. Or at least, that was the arrangement Christian believed existed. In reality, Paula understood their financial systems extremely well. And the more data she gathered, the more the timeline shifted away from Aspen. Hotel charges from Maui appeared 2 days into the trip. A restaurant bill for 3 guests, then 4. A boating excursion, spa appointments. One charge caught her attention in particular: a children's surf lesson package. Paula stared at the transaction for a moment longer than the others. Christian had no children. Neither of them did. She saved the statement into the folder. Then she continued collecting information quietly and methodically. During their occasional phone calls, Christian sounded relaxed, in a way she hadn't heard in years. In the background of one call, Paula heard a faint voice. A boy's voice. Laughter. Christian quickly moved to another room. "Just some people at the hotel," he said casually. Paula made no comment. She simply wrote the date and time of the call in one of her notebooks. The ocean outside the house moved in steady, predictable rhythms. Days passed. And as the information gathered slowly inside Paula Whitaker's files, one thing became increasingly clear. Christian Whitaker had not gone to Aspen for a conference. He had gone somewhere else entirely, and he had not gone alone. By the end of the first week, Paula already knew something else as well. The truth about where Christian was traveling might eventually matter. But the financial patterns surrounding the trip, those mattered far more. Because when Paula opened the property records associated with the Whitaker house that same evening, she discovered something Christian himself had not thought about in years. The ownership structure of the house was not as simple as he believed. Christian Whitaker left Los Angeles before sunrise on a Tuesday. The coastal fog still clung low over the Pacific, turning the Malibu road into a quiet ribbon of gray as his car moved south toward the airport. Paula stood in the doorway of the Whitaker house and watched the headlights disappear around the curve. She raised a hand briefly when he glanced back through the windshield, but he had already turned his attention to the road. Inside the house, the morning felt unusually still. For a moment, Paula simply stood in the entry hall. The house always sounded different when Christian traveled. Without his phone calls, without the echo of hurried footsteps, the building returned to its older rhythm, the one it had carried long before either of them had lived there. She closed the door. Then she walked into her study. Paula did not immediately begin searching for proof of anything. Instead, she continued doing exactly what she had always done. She documented, her laptop open to the folders she had created days earlier. April Travel Christian. The subfolders were still mostly empty, but that would change soon enough. Paula had long ago learned that information gathered slowly was usually more reliable than information chased too quickly. She began with a simple task: flights. Christian had said he was flying to Aspen. That would normally involve a flight to Denver, followed by a smaller connecting flight. Paula knew the usual patterns, because Christian had attended conferences there before. But airline confirmations often appeared automatically in shared financial summaries. Within minutes, she found the transaction. Not Aspen, not Denver. A round-trip ticket to Kahului Airport, Maui. Paula did not react outwardly. She simply downloaded the receipt and placed it in the folder. Next came the hotel confirmation she had glimpsed earlier. 4 Seasons Resort Maui at Wailea. 10 nights. Ocean View Suite. She saved the document as well. For a few seconds, Paula rested her hands quietly on the keyboard. Christian had not only lied about where he was going. He had lied with confidence. The kind of confidence that usually came from believing the lie would never be questioned. Paula closed the browser and reached for one of the small notebooks beside her desk. Her handwriting was precise, almost architectural. April 9th, Christian departure. Claimed Aspen Summit. Confirmed flight LAX. OGG Maui. She set the notebook aside. Outside, sunlight slowly began to break through the fog, illuminating the wide glass panels that faced the ocean. For most of the morning, Paula worked on ordinary tasks, emails, scheduling calls with a preservation committee, reviewing a restoration report from another historic property she consulted on occasionally. She did not rush to examine the rest of the travel details. There was no need. By evening, the next pieces of information arrived naturally. Credit card alerts appeared automatically through the financial dashboard Paula had quietly monitored for years. The first charge appeared shortly after noon. 4 Seasons Maui dining, $412.80. Paula opened the transaction details. Number of guests, 3. She looked at the entry carefully before saving the record. 3 guests, not 1. She placed the file inside the expenses folder. Later that night, another charge appeared. Island Adventures Maui Private Snorkeling. Charter amount $2,940. Guests, 4. Paula paused for a moment. 4. She did not speculate. Instead, she saved the receipt. The next day, more information followed. A boutique clothing purchase, 2 spa reservations, a children's surf lesson package. That last charge remained on the screen slightly longer than the others. Christian had never shown the slightest interest in surfing, and he certainly had never enrolled in surf lessons for himself. Paula opened a new page in her notebook. April 10th, Maui expenses begin. Restaurant, 3 guests. Boat charter, 4 guests. Surf lessons, child participant. She closed the notebook again. Still, Paula did not call Christian. She waited. That evening, he phoned her himself. "Hey," Christian said cheerfully when she answered. His voice sounded different, lighter, somehow relaxed, in a way that rarely appeared when he was working. "How's Aspen?" Paula asked. There was a brief pause. "Busy," he replied quickly. "Meetings all day?" In the background, Paula heard something faint. Laughter, not the low voices of business associates gathered in a hotel bar. Higher, younger, a boy's voice. Then another voice, a woman speaking indistinctly. Christian cleared his throat. "Just some people in the hallway," he said quickly, though Paula had not asked. She nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see her. "How's the weather there?" she asked. Cold, Christian replied. Paula looked through the window toward the warm Pacific sunset glowing across the water. "Yes," she said quietly. "I imagine it would be." They spoke for only a few more minutes before Christian ended the call. "I've got an early panel tomorrow," he explained. After the line went silent, Paula sat for a moment before writing again in the notebook. April 10th phone call. Background voices, female adult plus male child. Then she closed the notebook and placed it beside the others. The next few days continued in the same pattern. Information arrived without resistance. Charges, receipts, small digital footprints, a family restaurant bill with a handwritten note on the receipt that appeared in the transaction scan. Mahalo Lauren. Paula stared at the name for a moment. Lauren. She did not know anyone named Lauren, but Christian clearly did. The more Paula assembled the pieces, the clearer the structure became. And once she recognized the pattern, something else occurred to her as well. Christian was not hiding this carefully. He believed he didn't have to, which meant he believed something else too. He believed the life he had built with Paula was secure enough that his behavior could not threaten it. That belief, more than the affair itself, interested Paula, because secure structures usually rested on legal foundations, and legal foundations could be examined. That evening, after organizing the newest financial documents, Paula opened another set of files she had not reviewed in several years. Property records. The Whitaker house had been purchased 12 years earlier during one of Christian's early development successes. At the time, their attorney had recommended placing the property into a family trust for tax purposes and long-term estate planning. Christian had agreed immediately, but he had never bothered to study the details afterward. Paula had. The trust documents appeared on her screen now, dozens of pages outlining ownership rights, management authority, and signing permissions. She read through them slowly, the way she used to read restoration blueprints. Most people assumed houses were owned by individuals, but complicated properties were often owned by structures, trusts, holding companies, legal entities designed to manage assets over time. The Whitaker House Trust listed two trustees, Christian Whitaker and Paula Whitaker. But the operational authority, the authority to initiate certain transactions under specific circumstances, had been assigned to the active managing trustee. Years earlier, when Christian's development projects had required extensive travel, he had signed a temporary management clause so Paula could oversee property decisions while he focused on business. That clause had never been removed. Paula read the paragraph again carefully. Then she leaned back in her chair. Outside, the ocean wind moved steadily against the glass. Christian Whitaker was currently in Maui with a woman named Lauren and at least one child. He believed his marriage was strong enough that none of this would matter. He believed the house would always be waiting when he returned. What Christian did not realize was that Paula had just rediscovered something extremely important. The Whitaker house, the $20 million estate overlooking the Pacific, was not controlled solely by him, and the documents sitting quietly inside Paula Whitaker's files gave her a level of authority Christian had completely forgotten existed. The discovery did not create excitement. Paula Whitaker did not sit back in her chair with sudden satisfaction, nor did she rush to call anyone. The realization about the Whitaker House Trust settled into her mind the same way structural truths often did, quietly, with the calm weight of something inevitable. She reread the clause once more. Active Managing Trustee Authority. Years earlier, when Christian had been expanding his development business across California, the arrangement had been practical. Someone needed to handle property logistics while he traveled constantly. Paula had simply stepped into that role. But over time, Christian's attention had shifted entirely toward larger investments, commercial properties, luxury developments, partnerships with private investors. The Malibu house had become background scenery in his life. To Paula, however, it had never been background. It was the one structure she had personally rebuilt, documented, and protected, which meant she understood something Christian had forgotten. Authority written into legal documents did not disappear simply because someone stopped thinking about it. It remained in place until someone formally removed it. And Christian had never removed it. Paula closed the trust documents and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the sun had dropped low over the Pacific, casting long lines of amber light across the glass walls of the house. The tide moved slowly against the rocks below the cliff. For several minutes, Paula simply watched the water. Then she opened another window on her computer. Property valuation reports. The Malibu coastline had changed dramatically in the past decade. Properties that once seemed expensive had quietly tripled in value as tech wealth flooded California's luxury markets. The Whitaker house sat on one of the most desirable stretches of land along the coast. Private access road, direct ocean frontage, historic designation that prevented neighboring developers from building taller structures that might block the view. Paula opened the most recent appraisal. Estimated value $17.8 million. She knew the number was already outdated. Recent sales nearby had exceeded $20 million. Paula saved the report inside the archive. Then she created a new folder, Property Legal Review. Inside it, she placed the trust documents, the appraisal records, and the renovation history she'd compiled over the past 12 years. The file grew quickly. By the time the sun disappeared completely, Paula had assembled a complete legal and financial picture of the property. Only then did she reach for her phone. The number she dialed belonged to a man named Daniel Reeves. Daniel had been the Whitakers' real estate attorney during several of Christian's earlier development projects. In the years since, he had gradually shifted toward private property law, representing high-net-worth clients in complex real estate transactions. He answered on the third ring. Paula, Daniel said, sounding mildly surprised. "It's been a while. It has," Paula agreed. They exchanged a few brief pleasantries before she spoke again. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," she said. "What kind of consultation? Property authority within an existing trust structure?" There was a short pause on the line. "That sounds serious," Daniel said carefully. "It's thorough," Paula replied. Daniel gave a quiet laugh. "That sounds like you." They arranged to meet the following afternoon at Daniel's office in Santa Monica. Paula ended the call and returned to her computer. Christian's credit card transactions had updated again. Another dinner charge from Maui, this one larger. 4 guests. She saved the receipt. Then she closed the laptop. Daniel Reeves's office overlooked Wilshire Boulevard, several floors above the steady movement of afternoon traffic. The space was quiet and organized in the way that experienced attorneys often preferred. When Paula arrived the next day, Daniel greeted her with a polite handshake. He had aged slightly since she had last seen him, more gray at the temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but his manner remained attentive. They sat at a conference table where Paula placed a thick binder in front of him. Daniel opened it. Inside were neatly organized sections: trust documents, property reports, financial statements, timeline notes. Daniel began reading. For nearly 20 minutes, he said nothing. Paula waited patiently. Finally, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said slowly, "you weren't exaggerating when you said this would be thorough." "Is the structure still valid?" Paula asked. Daniel tapped the trust document with his pen. "Yes," he said. He flipped to another page. "This clause gives the active managing trustee authority to initiate certain property transactions, including sale, provided they meet fiduciary guidelines and proper documentation." Paula nodded slightly. "And the active managing trustee is?" she asked. Daniel looked up at her. "You." Silence settled briefly in the room. "Christian signed this clause himself 12 years ago," Daniel continued. "I remember drafting it. At the time, he was traveling constantly and wanted someone he trusted handling local property decisions." Paula did not respond. Daniel studied her expression. "Has something changed?" he asked. Paula slid another folder across the table. Daniel opened it. Inside were several printed credit card statements, travel receipts, hotel confirmations, restaurant charges. He read them slowly. "Maui," Daniel said. "Yes." And Aspen was the explanation. Yes. Daniel closed the folder. He did not ask further questions. Real estate attorneys learned long ago that clients often arrived with information that spoke for itself. "What exactly are you considering?" he asked carefully. Paula folded her hands on the table. "If the property were placed on the market," she said calmly, "what would be the cleanest legal structure for executing the sale?" "Under the trust," Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That depends on the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Well, Daniel said, choosing his words thoughtfully. "In a situation where both trustees are aligned, the process is straightforward. In a situation where they are not, the managing trustee's authority becomes more significant." "And the documentation?" Paula asked. "Would need to be extremely precise," Daniel replied. "Any buyer would require clear verification that the managing trustee has legitimate authority to proceed." Paula nodded. Daniel watched her for another moment. "Paula," he said quietly, "this property is extremely valuable. If you're thinking about selling it, you'll want experienced representation. A discreet broker. Someone who understands high-value transactions. Do you know anyone like that?" Paula asked. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "I know several." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a list of contacts. "One in particular might interest you," he said. He wrote a name on a notepad and slid it across the table. "Sophia Martinez. Martinez Coastal Realty. She specializes in private luxury transactions," Daniel explained. "Off-market deals. Buyers who prefer discretion." Paula looked at the name. "Would she know potential buyers?" Daniel nodded. "For a property like the Whitaker house," he said, "there are always buyers waiting." Paula folded the paper and placed it inside her binder. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "One more thing," he said. "Yes, if you move forward with this, timing will matter." "How so?" "Transactions like this can close quickly if the buyer has liquidity," Daniel explained. "But once the process begins, it becomes difficult to reverse." Paula considered that for a moment. "That's acceptable," she said. Daniel studied her expression again. There was no anger there, no panic, only the quiet steadiness of someone assembling a structure piece by piece. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "If you decide to proceed, I'll help ensure everything is legally airtight." Paula stood and gathered her binder. "Thank you, Daniel." As she left the office building, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers lining Wilshire Boulevard. Paula walked toward her car slowly. Inside her bag rested the name of a real estate broker who specialized in discreet luxury sales. Back in Maui, Christian Whitaker was finishing another expensive dinner with 3 other people who believed they understood his future. None of them knew that the foundation beneath that future had already begun to shift. And for the first time in 12 years, Paula Whitaker was seriously considering a possibility Christian had never imagined. The Whitaker house, the house he believed would always be waiting for him, might soon belong to someone else entirely. The name Daniel Reeves had written on the notepad stayed with Paula Whitaker the entire drive back to Malibu. Sophia Martinez. Discreet luxury transactions. Buyers who preferred privacy. Paula understood what Daniel had been implying without saying it directly. Houses like the Whitaker estate were rarely sold through ordinary listings. When properties reach that level of value, historic oceanfront land, irreplaceable architecture, decades of preservation sales often happened quietly. The right buyer already existed. They were simply waiting for the opportunity. When Paula reached the long coastal driveway leading to the Whitaker house, the Pacific was calm, the afternoon sky clear enough to see Catalina Island faintly on the horizon. For a moment, she sat in the parked car and looked toward the house. 12 years earlier, when she had first walked through its deteriorating halls, broken windows had allowed sea wind to move freely through the rooms. Paint had peeled from the walls. Sections of the roof had been close to collapse. Christian had seen it as a development gamble. Paula had seen something else. A structure that had survived earthquakes, storms, and decades of neglect. Something resilient. Over the years, she had worked with preservation specialists, craftsmen, and architects to restore every room as faithfully as possible. The original tile floors had been uncovered beneath layers of modern materials. Iron railings had been reforged by hand. The gardens had been rebuilt based on photographs from the 1930s. Every detail had been documented. The house had not simply been renovated, it had been protected. And now, Paula stood in the driveway wondering if its next chapter might begin without Christian Whitaker. Inside the house, the silence felt deeper than usual. Paula placed her bag on the kitchen counter and opened her laptop again. Christian's expenses had updated. Another restaurant charge from Maui. This one was larger than the others. $587. 4 guests. She opened the digital receipt attached to the transaction. The scanned image included the server's handwritten note near the bottom. "Thank you, Lauren. Enjoy the island." Paula stared at the name again. Lauren Carter. She opened a new document inside the folder she had created earlier. Subject, Lauren Carter. Below the title, she began listing the information she had gathered so far. Name appearing on restaurant receipt, associated travel charges, surf lesson reservation for child, multiple guest dining records. Paula did not know who Lauren Carter was yet, but she would. She saved the document and closed the file. Then she picked up the small folded paper Daniel had given her. Sophia Martinez. Paula dialed the number. The call was answered quickly. "Martinez Coastal Realty," a woman's voice said warmly. "Hello," Paula replied. "My name is Paula Whitaker. Daniel Reeves suggested I speak with you." There was a brief pause on the line. "Ah," the woman said. "Daniel and I work together occasionally. How can I help you, Miss Whitaker, son?" "I have a property in Malibu that may require a confidential valuation." "Confidential," Sophia repeated gently. "Yes." The pause that followed was not hesitation. It was recognition. Agents who handled high-value properties understood the meaning of that word immediately. "I'd be happy to discuss it," Sophia said. "Would you prefer to meet in person? That would be best." They arranged to meet the following morning. After ending the call, Paula walked through the house slowly. The living room windows stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the ocean like a moving painting. The late sunlight turned the water gold. Paula paused near the fireplace, where an old photograph hung above the mantel. The image showed the house shortly after it had been built in 1928. A black and white car sat in the driveway. A woman wearing a long dress stood on the terrace. Paula had spent hours studying that photograph years ago, trying to understand the original structure. She wondered briefly what that woman might have thought if she could see the house now. Then Paula turned away. Sophia Martinez arrived the next morning precisely at 10. She stepped out of a dark blue Mercedes wearing a tailored jacket and carrying a thin leather portfolio. Her posture was confident but relaxed, the practiced balance of someone accustomed to speaking with wealthy clients. Paula opened the door before Sophia reached it. "Miss Whitaker?" Sophia asked. "Yes." They shook hands. Sophia glanced briefly around the entry hall as she stepped inside. Even experienced real estate brokers could not completely hide their reaction when entering the Whitaker house for the first time. The restoration work was unmistakable. Original wooden beams stretched across the ceiling. The stone floors had been polished, but not replaced. Sunlight flowed through wide arches facing the ocean. Sophia looked toward the windows. "This property is remarkable," she said quietly. Paula nodded. "It took several years to restore properly. I can see that." They moved into the living room, where Sophia set her portfolio on the table. "Daniel mentioned that you were exploring possibilities," she said. "Yes." Sophia opened her portfolio and removed a tablet computer. "Before we discuss potential buyers, I'd like to understand the legal structure of the property," she said. Paula slid a copy of the trust documents across the table. Sophia read them carefully. "Active managing trustee authority," she said thoughtfully after a moment. "That simplifies certain aspects of a sale." "It does." Sophia nodded slowly. May I ask if Mr. Whitaker is aware you're considering this? Paula's answer was calm. No. Sophia did not react visibly. Agents in her position had learned long ago that complicated personal situations often surrounded valuable properties. Instead, she asked the next practical question. Is the property currently occupied? Yes, Paula said. But that can change quickly. Sophia studied the documents again. Then she set the tablet down. Miss Whitaker, she said, for a house like this, we wouldn't list publicly unless you wanted maximum exposure. I don't. I assumed as much. Sophia leaned back slightly. There are a handful of buyers who search specifically for historic coastal properties, she continued. Most of them prefer private negotiations, off-market. Paula listened quietly. One of those buyers, Sophia said, has contacted me twice in the past year, asking whether this house would ever become available. Paula looked up. Who a man named Nathaniel Brooks. The name meant nothing to Paula immediately. Sophia explained. Tech investors, she said. Early venture capital in several major platforms. Recently started acquiring historic properties along the coast. Why this house? Sophia smiled faintly. Because it's one of the few remaining estates in Malibu that hasn't been redeveloped into modern glass architecture. She glanced toward the ocean again. And because land like this doesn't come onto the market often. Paula folded her hands. If he were interested, she asked what price range would be realistic. Sophia considered the question. Based on recent sales, restoration quality, and the privacy of this location, she said slowly, I believe we could reasonably approach $20 million. The number hung quietly in the room. Paula did not react outwardly, but Sophia noticed the small way her fingers tightened briefly around each other before relaxing again. That would require a buyer capable of moving quickly, Paula said. Nathaniel Brooks was known for exactly that. Cash purchase, Sophia said. Or equivalent liquidity through escrow. He wouldn't require lengthy financing approvals. Paula nodded. How quickly could a transaction close? Sophia answered without hesitation. If the buyer agrees and documentation is prepared properly, 3 weeks, possibly sooner. Paula stood and walked slowly toward the window overlooking the Pacific. The tide was rising again, waves breaking gently against the rocks below. For 12 years, she had protected this house, but houses were not meant to become prisons. Behind her, Sophia waited silently. Finally, Paula turned. Contact him, she said. Sophia's expression remained professional, but something like curiosity flickered briefly in her eyes. I will, she replied, as she gathered her portfolio. Sophia asked one final question. May I tell him the property is available immediately? Paula considered the question for a moment. Then she answered, yes. Miles away in Maui, Christian Whitaker was standing on a beach beside Lauren Carter and her son Ethan, watching the sunset over the Pacific. He believed the life waiting for him in Malibu was unchanged. He believed the Whitaker house would still be there, exactly as he had left it. What Christian Whitaker did not know was that the first quiet step towards selling that house for $20 million had just been taken. Sophia Martinez did not waste time. Within 24 hours of leaving the Whitaker house, she had already placed a call to Nathaniel Brooks's private office in San Francisco. People in Sophia's position learned quickly that timing mattered more than enthusiasm. Wealthy buyers often moved only when an opportunity appeared rare enough to justify immediate action. The Whitaker house qualified. 2 days later, Sophia's phone rang while she was reviewing property files in her office overlooking the Pacific Coast Highway. Martinez Coastal Realty, she answered. Miss Martinez, a calm male voice replied. This is David Lynn from Brooks Holdings. Sophia sat up slightly. Yes, Mr. Lynn. Mr. Brooks received your message regarding the Malibu property. Sophia waited. He would like to know if the home is still privately available. It is, Sophia said. And the owners are prepared to discuss a transaction, yes. There was a pause while Lynn likely consulted someone in the background. Mr. Brooks would like to view the property in person, he said, discreetly. Sophia smiled faintly. That can be arranged. Nathaniel Brooks arrived 3 days later. He did not travel with the large entourage people often expected from billionaire investors. When his dark SUV stopped at the end of the Whitaker driveway, only 2 people stepped out: Nathaniel Brooks and David Lynn. Brooks was younger than Paula expected, mid-40s perhaps. His reputation in the technology world had grown from early investments in several companies that later became global platforms. But unlike many tech investors, Brooks had recently turned his attention towards something slower: historic architecture. When Paula opened the door, Sophia stood beside Brooks on the terrace. "Miss Whitaker," Sophia said politely, "this is Mr. Nathaniel Brooks." Brooks extended his hand. "Thank you for allowing me to visit," he said. His voice was quiet but confident. Paula shook his hand. "You're welcome." They stepped inside. Brooks did not begin speaking immediately. Instead, he walked slowly through the entry hall, looking upward at the exposed beams Paula had spent months restoring. "Original wood?" he asked. "Yes," Paula replied. "Spanish cedar imported in 1928. Brooks nodded slightly. "I thought so." As they continued through the house, Brooks asked questions that surprised Sophia. Not about square footage, not about luxury features, about structure. "Were the foundation supports reinforced during the restoration?" "Yes," Paula said. "Seismic upgrades in 2016. And the tile floors, original patterns preserved. Some tiles were placed individually." Brooks crouched briefly to examine the floor near the fireplace. "Remarkable work," he said. For nearly an hour, they walked through the house together. Brooks studied the ocean-facing terraces, the gardens Paula had redesigned, using historic landscaping plans, and the wide stone staircase leading down toward the cliff path. Finally, they stood outside on the upper balcony overlooking the Pacific. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water like moving glass. Brooks rested his hands lightly on the balcony rail. "Houses like this rarely survive intact," he said. Paula nodded. "Most are redeveloped." "Yes," Brooks said, "which is why this one interests me." He turned to face her. "May I ask why you're considering selling?" Paula answered simply, "Circumstances change." Brooks accepted the answer without pressing further. Then he looked toward Sophia. "What price range are we discussing?" Sophia spoke carefully. "20 million. Brooks did not appear surprised. Instead, he looked back at the house. "That seems reasonable," he said. Sophia blinked slightly. Most negotiations at this level involved long discussions, counteroffers, and complex positioning. But Brooks simply nodded. "Subject to title verification and structural documentation," he added. Paula gestured toward the house. "I have extensive records." Brooks smiled faintly. "I suspected you might." David Lynn stepped forward, then opening a thin tablet device. "If Miss Whitaker agrees," he said, "we can begin preliminary due diligence immediately." Sophia glanced at Paula. Paula nodded once. "Yes." Lynn typed several notes into the tablet. "Escrow could be opened within a week," he said. "Mr. Brooks prefers expedited transactions." "How quickly could closing occur?" Paul asked. Lynn answered calmly, 2 to 3 weeks. Sophia looked briefly at Paul again. This timeline was even faster than expected. Brooks turned toward the ocean again. "Miss Whitaker," he said quietly, "I would intend to preserve the house as you have restored it." Paula studied his expression. "Not redevelop?" she asked. "No." Brooks gestured toward the structure behind them. "This house already survived nearly a century," he said. "It would be a mistake to erase that." For the first time during the meeting, Paula allowed herself the smallest hint of relief. She had spent 12 years protecting the house. If it was going to pass to someone else, she wanted it to remain intact. "I appreciate that," she said. Brooks nodded once more. Then he turned toward Sophia. "Begin the process." The following week moved with quiet speed. Escrow opened through Pacific Title Company. Daniel Reeves reviewed every document personally. Title verification confirmed the trust structure exactly as Paula had described. The authority clause remained valid. Paula Whitaker, as active managing trustee, had the legal right to proceed. Inspection waivers were issued. Structural reports Paula had compiled years earlier satisfied Brooks's engineers immediately. Wire transfers for the purchase funds were arranged through Brooks Holdings. Throughout the entire process, Paula maintained the same steady routine she had followed for years. Morning coffee by the ocean, document review, phone calls with Daniel and Sophia. Christian called twice during the week from Maui. The first time he sounded cheerful. "We might extend the trip a couple of days," he said casually. Paula sat at the kitchen counter listening. "That's fine," she replied. In the background, she again heard the boy's voice, Ethan. Christian lowered his voice slightly. "Just some friends from the resort," he explained quickly. Paula wrote the date of the call in her notebook after hanging up. The second call came 2 days later. Christian sounded slightly distracted. "Things are great here," he said. "I'm glad," Paula replied. She did not mention escrow accounts. She did not mention Nathaniel Brooks. She did not mention the $20 million transaction now moving quietly toward completion. Christian believed the house in Malibu remained exactly as he had left it. And Paula did nothing to change that belief. 3 days later, Daniel Reeves called. "Funds confirmed," he said. Paula sat in her study, looking out at the ocean as he spoke. "Escrow closing documents will be ready tomorrow morning." And after that, she asked, "Ownership transfers immediately." Paula nodded slowly. "Thank you, Daniel." When the call ended, the house around her felt unusually quiet. For 12 years, she had walked these rooms every day, restored them, maintained them, protected them. And now, the final step had arrived. The Whitaker house, valued at $20 million, was about to change hands. Miles away in Maui, Christian Whitaker was finishing another sunset dinner with Lauren Carter and her family. He laughed easily as Ethan described a surfing lesson earlier that afternoon. Lauren rested her hand lightly on Christian's arm. "Malibu will be nice when we get back," she said. Christian smiled confidently. "Yes," he replied. "It will." Neither of them knew that escrow documents were already waiting in California, and that within 24 hours, the house Christian believed belonged to him would legally belong to someone else. The closing documents arrived the following morning. They were delivered electronically, first secure files from Pacific Title Company, and then again in physical form by courier. Paula Whitaker sat at the long oak table in her study, the same place where she had spent years organizing restoration records for the house. Now the documents before her were different. Not preservation, transfer. Daniel Reeves joined the meeting through video call, his office visible behind him. Sophia Martinez sat across from Paula at the table, a leather folder open in front of her. "All right," Daniel said through the screen. "Let's review everything once more before signatures." Sophia nodded. Paula listened quietly as Daniel walked through the final steps of the transaction: escrow verification, title clearance, trust authority confirmation. Nathaniel Brooks's funds had already been wired into escrow the previous evening. $20 million. The number remained strangely abstract in Paula's mind. Money, she had learned long ago, was rarely the most powerful element in a decision like this. Timing was. Daniel finished the final explanation and leaned back slightly. "If you're comfortable proceeding," he said, "we can execute the documents." Paula picked up the first pen. Her hand did not shake. Each page required a signature, some requiring initials as well. The process took nearly 20 minutes. When she finished the final document, she placed the pen down carefully. Sophia gathered the signed papers. "I'll send these to escrow immediately," she said. Daniel nodded. "Once they're received, the title transfer will process within hours." Paula closed the folder. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Sophia stood. "Congratulations," she said quietly. Paula gave a small nod, but her expression did not change. Because while the legal ownership of the Whitaker house was now moving toward completion, Paula understood something else. Christian Whitaker still had no idea. Later that afternoon, Paula walked slowly through the house again. The ocean wind moved softly through the open terrace doors. The scent of salt and warm stone filled the air. She passed through each room, almost like someone visiting a museum she had helped build. The living room, the library, the kitchen where Christian often grabbed coffee between phone calls. None of it felt dramatic. There was no sense of triumph, only the quiet awareness that a long chapter of her life had reached its final page. Her phone vibrated on the counter. "Christian," Paula answered. "Hey," he said, sounding relaxed. "How's Maui?" she asked. "Perfect," Christian replied. "You should see the sunsets here." Paula looked toward the Pacific outside her window. "I imagine they're beautiful." There was laughter in the background again, the same voices Paula had heard before. Lauren and Ethan. "We might stay another night," Christian said casually. Lauren, some people we met here suggested a restaurant tomorrow." Paula said nothing for a moment. Christian continued quickly. "Just vacation stuff." Paula wrote the date and time in her notebook with her free hand while he spoke. "That sounds nice," she said calmly. Christian did not notice. After the call ended, Paula closed the notebook and placed it beside the others. The house was quiet again. Escrow confirmation arrived that evening. The message appeared in Paula's email inbox just after 6. Subject: escrow closed Whitaker property. She opened the message. Inside was a single line of confirmation from Pacific Title Company. Ownership transfer complete. Funds released to trust account. The Whitaker house now legally belonged to Nathaniel Brooks. Paula read the email twice. Then she closed her laptop. Outside, the sun had begun to sink toward the horizon again, painting the sky with long streaks of orange and gold. For a moment, Paula stood near the window, watching the ocean. Then she walked to the hallway cabinet, where she kept the old preservation notebooks. One by one, she removed them from the shelf. 12 years of documentation, renovation plans, structural reports, photographs of restoration work. All of it represented the work she had poured into the house. She carried the notebooks back to the study and placed them in a storage box. They would not remain here. Not anymore. 2 days later, Christian Whitaker boarded a flight from Maui to Los Angeles. Lauren Carter sat beside him, her son Ethan, leaning against the window watching the clouds below. Denise Carter sat across the aisle. Christian looked comfortable, relaxed in the way people often appeared after long vacations. "Malibu will feel quiet after this," Lauren said. Christian smiled. Not for long. Ethan turned toward him. "Are we going to the big house?" the boy asked. Christian laughed lightly. "Maybe for a visit." Lauren's eyes flickered toward him. "Maybe more than that," she said. Christian squeezed her hand gently. "We'll see." The plane continued its long path toward California. None of them noticed the message waiting on Christian's phone. Several messages, actually. Missed calls, emails. One from Daniel Reeves, another from Pacific Title Company, and one more from a number Christian didn't recognize. Nathaniel Brooks's legal office. Back in Malibu, Paula Whitaker stood in the now empty study of the house she had restored. Most of her personal belongings had already been packed quietly over the past 2 days. The storage boxes were stacked neatly near the hallway. She had arranged temporary accommodations farther up the coast. Carmel by the sea, a small house near the water. Not large, but peaceful. Sophia Martinez had called earlier that afternoon to confirm one final detail. "Mr. Brooks will visit next week," Sophia had said. Paula nodded. "I'll be gone before then." Sophia hesitated slightly. "You handled this with remarkable composure," she said. Paula did not respond to the compliment. Instead, she looked around the room one last time. Some structures, she said quietly, served their purpose for a time. Sophia seemed to understand. The next evening, Christian Whitaker's car pulled into the Malibu driveway. Lauren and her family followed in a rental SUV behind him. Christian stepped out first. The ocean breeze felt cooler here than in Hawaii. He stretched slightly and looked toward the house. "Home," he said. Lauren smiled. Ethan ran ahead toward the front steps. But something felt different immediately. The lights inside the house were off. The windows dark. Christian frowned slightly as he walked toward the door. And just inside the entrance hall, resting neatly on the console table, was an envelope with his name written across the front. Christian Whitaker. Inside that envelope were several documents. One of them was a letter from Daniel Reeves. Another was a printed confirmation from Pacific Title Company. And the final document contained a single sentence that Christian Whitaker would read 3 times before fully understanding it. The Whitaker property had been sold for $20 million, and the transaction had been completed 2 days earlier. Christian Whitaker stood in the dim entry hall for several seconds before opening the envelope. Behind him, Ethan Carter's footsteps echoed excitedly on the stone path outside. "This place is huge," the boy said. Lauren Carter followed him up the steps, pausing briefly to look toward the ocean. The house, lit only by the fading glow of sunset through the windows, seemed quieter than she expected. Christian barely noticed. He slid a finger under the edge of the envelope and pulled out the papers. The first document was a letter printed on professional letterhead. Reeves and Dalton Property Law, Santa Monica. Christian frowned slightly and began reading. The letter was brief. "Mr. Whitaker, please review the attached documents regarding the Whitaker Property Trust transaction finalized on April 17th. As stipulated under the Trust's Managing Trustee Authority Clause, Ms. Paula Whitaker executed the sale of the Malibu property through Pacific Title Company. Escrow has closed and ownership has transferred to the buyer, Mr. Nathaniel Brooks." Christian's eyes stopped moving halfway through the paragraph. For a moment, he assumed he had misunderstood something. He turned to the next document. A printed escrow confirmation. Pacific Title Company. Transaction completed. Purchase price $20, 00000. Christian's breathing slowed. Behind him, the front door opened. Lauren stepped inside, Ethan close behind. Denise Carter followed more cautiously, glancing around the quiet interior. Lauren noticed the expression on Christian's face immediately. "What is it?" she asked. Christian didn't answer. He continued staring at the page. Lauren walked closer. "Christian." He handed her the document without speaking. Lauren read the first lines quickly, then again, slower. "What is this?" she said. Christian finally looked up. "It says the house was sold." Ethan looked between them confused. "Sold?" he asked. Denise stepped forward and took the paper from Lauren. Her eyes narrowed as she read. "Who's Paula Whitaker?" Ethan asked. Christian didn't answer immediately. Paula's name sat there in black ink, calm and precise. Managing Trustee. Executed Sale. Escrow closed. Lauren shook her head. "This must be some kind of mistake," she said. Christian took the document back and scanned the lines again. He had signed hundreds of property documents over the years. Development contracts, investment agreements, land acquisitions. The formatting here was familiar. This was not a mistake. But the conclusion still made no sense. Paula would never sell the house without telling him, unless Christian's mind began moving quickly through possibilities. Fraud, forgery, legal misinterpretation. He reached for his phone. Several notifications filled the screen. Missed calls, emails, one from Daniel Reeves. Christian opened it. The message was short. "Christian, you should review the attached documents regarding the Malibu Property Trust. Paula exercised her authority under the Managing Trustee Clause you signed in 2011. The sale has closed legally. If you have questions, we can discuss them tomorrow." Christian stared at the message. He had not thought about the trust structure in years. At the time, the clause had seemed like routine paperwork. A convenience? Something temporary. Now he read the words again. Managing Trustee Authority. Lauren watched him closely. "Call someone," she said. "Your lawyer? This can't be real." Christian dialed Daniel Reeves immediately. The call rang several times before Daniel answered. "Christian," Daniel said calmly. "What the hell is this?" Christian demanded. "I assume you received the documents. You're telling me Paula sold the house, yes?" How Daniel's voice remained steady. "You signed the trust clause 12 years ago, giving Paula managing trustee authority during extended travel periods. The clause was never revoked. Christian felt a sharp tightening in his chest. That was for maintenance decisions, he said. Daniel paused. It included broader property authority under certain fiduciary conditions. Christian looked around the darkened house. You're saying she just sold it without telling me? She was legally permitted to proceed? Daniel replied. Christian laughed sharply. This house is worth $20 million. Yes. And you're telling me I had no say? Daniel chose his words carefully. The trust structure gave Paula the authority to initiate the transaction. The buyer completed due diligence. The escrow company verified the documentation. Everything is legally valid. Christian ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. Lauren stepped closer, trying to listen to the conversation. Christian lowered his voice. Who bought it? Nathaniel Brooks, Daniel said. Christian knew the name. Brooks Holdings had purchased several high-value coastal properties in recent years. You're serious, Christian said quietly. Yes. When did this happen? Escrow closed 2 days ago. Christian turned slowly and looked through the glass doors toward the ocean. 2 days, while he had been finishing dinner in Maui with Lauren and her family. The house had been sold. $20 million transferred. Ownership changed. And he had known nothing. When do we need to leave? Christian asked finally. Daniel hesitated. The buyer plans to visit next week, he said. That wasn't my question. Another pause. The property now belongs to Mr. Brooks, Daniel said carefully. Technically, you are occupying it without his authorization. Christian ended the call. The room fell silent again. Lauren looked at him anxiously. So what happens now? She asked. Christian didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the window facing the Pacific. The waves moved steadily beneath the cliff. This house had always been his foundation, the place where deals were celebrated, where investors had gathered for dinners, where every major success in his career had been marked with another glass of wine on the terrace. Now he understood something that had never occurred to him before. The house had not truly belonged to him alone. Paula had always been part of the structure, the one who maintained the records, the one who understood the legal details he ignored. Lauren spoke again. We can fight this, right? Christian turned slowly. Fight what? The sale, she said. Christian shook his head. Escrow closed. Lauren frowned. So what does that mean? Christian looked down at the documents again. It means the house isn't ours anymore. Ethan shifted uneasily near the doorway. Denise Carter folded her arms. Lauren stared at Christian. But you said... Her voice faded. Christian remembered the words he had spoken on the beach in Maui only days earlier. Malibu will be nice when we get back. He looked around the silent house again. The restoration work Paula had overseen surrounded him on every side. The beams, the tile floors, the windows framing the ocean. All of it still stood exactly as it had before. But legally it belonged to someone else now, and Paula Whitaker, the woman he had assumed would always remain quietly in the background, had been the one who made it happen. Christian Whitaker did not sleep that night. The house felt different now. Not physically, but in the quiet, psychological way spaces change once their meaning shifts. Every room he walked through seemed to carry a strange distance, as though the walls themselves no longer belonged to him. Lauren had tried to reassure him earlier. There has to be something you can do, she said from the living room couch. You built your whole life here. Christian had not answered. Instead, he spent hours reading through the documents Paula had left behind. Trust agreements, escrow confirmations, legal notices. Each page was precise, structured, and professionally executed. Paula had not acted impulsively. She had prepared. Around 2 a.m, Christian stepped out onto the ocean terrace. The Pacific stretched dark and endless beyond the cliff. For years, he had believed he understood every important structure in his life, his company, his investments, his property portfolio. But now he was seeing something he had ignored for too long. Paula had been managing systems quietly in the background the entire time. Records, legal frameworks, authority clauses he had signed without reading carefully. He leaned against the balcony railing. The realization was uncomfortable. Not because Paula had acted illegally, but because she had acted completely within the rules he himself had created. Morning arrived slowly. Lauren woke first. She walked through the kitchen, her expression tense as she poured coffee. The usual luxury of the house, the marble counters, the wide windows overlooking the ocean, now felt strangely temporary. Ethan sat at the dining table scrolling on his phone. "Are we leaving today?" he asked. Lauren didn't answer immediately. "I don't know yet." Christian entered the room a few minutes later. He looked tired but controlled. Lauren studied him carefully. "What's the plan?" she asked. Christian took a sip of coffee before answering. "I'm meeting Daniel this afternoon, and we'll review everything." Lauren leaned forward. "You can challenge the sale, right?" Christian shook his head slowly. "No." Lauren frowned. There has to be some loophole. Christian set the cup down. "There isn't." "How do you know?" "Because the trust clause is real," he said quietly. "I signed it." The room fell silent. Lauren looked at him for several seconds. "Why would you give her that kind of authority?" she asked. Christian did not respond immediately. At the time 12 years earlier, the clause had seemed like nothing. He had been traveling constantly for development projects. Paula had handled local property matters. It had been convenient. But convenience had turned into oversight. And oversight had turned into $20 million, leaving his control. Christian glanced around the kitchen. Paula's presence was still everywhere in subtle ways. The organized pantry, the labeled storage cabinets, the meticulous arrangement of household files in the office. Even the coffee machine settings had small notes written in her careful handwriting. He had lived in this house for years without noticing how thoroughly she managed its systems. Now that she was gone, the absence felt unmistakable. Lauren broke the silence. "So, where is she?" she asked. Christian looked toward the hallway. "I don't know." The truth unsettled him more than he expected. Paula had not argued. She had not confronted him. She had simply moved, quietly, efficiently. And by the time he returned from Maui, everything had already been completed. That afternoon, Christian drove to Santa Monica to meet Daniel Reeves. Daniel's office looked exactly as it had when Paula visited earlier in the week. Neatly arranged files, large windows overlooking Wilshire Boulevard. Daniel greeted him calmly. "Christian." Christian dropped the folder of documents on the table. "You should have told me," he said. Daniel sat down across from him. "It wasn't my role to intervene." "You're my lawyer." "I'm the trust attorney," Daniel corrected. "For both trustees." Christian exhaled sharply. "This whole thing feels like a setup." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Christian," he said carefully, "Paula didn't break any laws. That's not the point." "Actually," Daniel replied quietly, "legally it is." Christian rubbed his forehead. "She sold a $20 million property without even telling me." Daniel folded his hands. "She didn't have to." Christian looked up. "And you're fine with that." Daniel's expression remained steady. "You signed the trust structure yourself." Christian didn't answer. Daniel continued. The managing trustee clause allowed Paula to initiate property transactions if they served the trust's financial interest. Christian laughed bitterly. "Selling the house counts as that. At $20 million, yes." Daniel slid a document across the table. A valuation report. The property appraisal last year estimated the house at around $17.8 million, Daniel explained. Paula secured an offer above market value. Christian stared at the number. $20 million. Daniel continued speaking calmly. "From a fiduciary perspective, the transaction benefits the trust." Christian leaned back in the chair. "So legally she did everything right?" "Yes." "And the buyer, Nathaniel Brooks?" Christian nodded slowly. Brooks was known for moving quickly on high-value properties. Daniel watched him carefully. "There's another point you should consider." Christian raised an eyebrow. What Daniel hesitated briefly. Paula didn't just sell the property. Christian frowned. What do you mean? Daniel tapped the folder of financial documents Christian had brought. She also documented several financial patterns over the past few months. Christian felt a faint tightening in his chest. What kind of patterns? Daniel met his eyes. Travel expenses, restaurant charges, boat charters, hotel suites, children's activities. The receipts Paula had collected formed a clear timeline. Christian looked away. That's none of her business. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside were printed bank statements, credit card reports, the same records Paula had gathered quietly. She hasn't used these documents yet, Daniel said. Use them for what Daniel's voice remained calm. Legal clarity. Christian understood immediately. Paula had not confronted him about the trip to Maui, but she had documented it. Every receipt, every charge, every name. Lauren Carter, Ethan Carter. Christian leaned back slowly. The full structure of Paula's plan was becoming visible now. She had not simply reacted emotionally. She had built a record, then executed the sale, and left. Daniel closed the folder. Christian, he said quietly, this situation could become much more complicated if handled poorly. Christian stared at the documents. For the first time, the idea that Paula might have anticipated every step ahead of him began to settle in. She planned this, he said. Daniel did not answer directly. Instead, he said something else. Paula is a very organized person. Christian sat silently, because the truth was becoming harder to ignore. While he had been in Maui enjoying a vacation with Lauren Carter and her family, Paula Whitaker had quietly dismantled the foundation of his life in Malibu. Legally, methodically, without raising her voice once. The meeting with Daniel Reeves ended without the kind of resolution Christian Whitaker had hoped for. There was no strategy that would reverse the sale. No procedural loophole waiting to be exploited. No technical oversight capable of undoing what had already been executed. The Whitaker house was gone. And the legal system Christian had relied on throughout his career had in this instance worked exactly as designed. Christian drove back along the Pacific Coast Highway in silence. The ocean stretched wide and gray beside the road waves rolling toward the shore with the same steady rhythm they had followed for centuries. He had always liked this drive. In the past, it felt like a corridor connecting his different worlds. Los Angeles business meetings, Malibu evenings, private investor dinners at the house overlooking the water. Now it felt like a long corridor leading nowhere. When he reached the Malibu driveway, Lauren's rental SUV was still parked beside his car. Inside the house, Lauren was standing in the living room, looking out through the glass walls toward the Pacific. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, headphones on, absorbed in a game. Lauren turned as Christian entered. "Well?" she asked. Christian set the folder of documents on the kitchen counter. "It's done," he said. Lauren frowned. "What do you mean done?" "I mean the sale is final." Lauren stepped closer. "So we just leave?" Christian leaned against the counter. "Yes?" Her expression hardened slightly. "You're not even going to try to fight it?" Christian looked at her. "I told you, escrow closed. Ownership transferred." Lauren folded her arms. "You're one of the biggest developers on this coast, Christian. People fight property disputes all the time." Christian exhaled slowly. "This isn't a dispute." Lauren said nothing. Christian continued. "I signed the trust clause. Paula had the authority." Lauren stared at him, and she just used it. "Yes." Ethan pulled off his headphones. "Are we moving?" he asked. Lauren hesitated. Christian answered quietly. "Yes." The boy looked disappointed. "But this place is amazing." Christian did not respond. Instead, he walked through the house again, noticing things that had once seemed ordinary. The kitchen shelves were nearly empty. The hallway cabinet where Paula kept her preservation notebooks stood open. Even the guest rooms upstairs had been cleared of personal items. Paula had not left in anger. She had left with preparation. Everything unnecessary was gone. Only the structure remained. Christian stood in the doorway of the study. For years, this room had been Paula's domain. The desk was now almost bare. Only one item remained in the center of the table. A single envelope. Christian picked it up. His name was written across the front again. Inside was a letter. Not legal, not formal. Just Paula's handwriting on a single sheet of paper. Christian read it slowly. Christian, the house was never meant to become a place where respect disappeared. When I realized it had, I began making other arrangements. You always said structures matter more than appearances. I agree. That's why I followed the structure you created. The sale protects the trust and closes a chapter that had already ended long before you went to Maui. I wish you clarity moving forward. Paula Christian read the letter again. There was no anger in the words, no accusation, just the quiet confirmation of something that had already been decided. Lauren appeared in the doorway behind him. What is it, she asked. Christian folded the letter. Nothing. Lauren studied his face. She planned this, she said. Christian did not answer. But he knew the truth. Paula had not reacted to Maui. She had anticipated it. Later that evening, Lauren and Denise began packing the few belongings they had brought into the house. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. 2 days earlier, they had imagined Malibu as the beginning of something new. Now it felt like borrowed space they had already overstayed. Lauren moved through the living room slowly. "Where are we going to stay?" she asked. Christian looked toward the ocean again. "I'll arrange something in Los Angeles." Lauren hesitated, and Paula Christian shrugged slightly. "I don't know where she went." Lauren seemed uneasy. "She just disappeared." Christian nodded. Paula Whitaker had spent 16 years living beside him. And yet now, when he tried to picture where she might be, he realized something uncomfortable. He had never asked what she wanted for herself. The following morning, Christian received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Whitaker?" a calm voice said when he answered. "This is David Lynn from Brooks Holdings." Christian knew the name immediately. "Yes, I wanted to confirm that you received the property transfer documents." Christian glanced around the house. "I did." "Mr. Brooks plans to visit the property early next week," Lynn continued. "We wanted to coordinate a smooth transition." Christian's jaw tightened slightly. "You're aware we're still here?" "Yes." Lynn's tone remained polite. "We're hoping to arrange a respectful timeline for vacating the property." Christian leaned against the counter. "How much time?" Lynn paused briefly. 3 days would be reasonable." Christian almost laughed. 3 days. After years of believing this house anchored his life, he now had 72 hours to leave it. "Fine," he said. "Thank you," Lynn replied. The call ended. Lauren entered the kitchen just as Christian lowered the phone. "What now?" she asked. Christian looked around the room one more time. The beams Paula had restored. The tile floors she had preserved. The wide windows framing the Pacific. All of it remained beautiful. All of it remained intact. But none of it belonged to him anymore. "We pack," Christian said quietly. Outside, the ocean continued its endless movement against the cliffs. And somewhere hundreds of miles north along the California coast, Paula Whitaker had already begun building a life that no longer depended on the Whitaker house or the man who once believed it would always be his. Christian Whitaker spent the next morning walking through the Malibu house with the strange awareness that every step he took was temporary. The ocean breeze still moved through the open terrace doors. Sunlight still filled the wide living room windows, exactly the same way it had for years. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time since he purchased the property 12 years earlier, Christian was not the person in control of what happened inside it. Lauren was already packing when he came downstairs. 2 suitcases lay open on the couch. Denise Carter folded clothing carefully beside them, while Ethan sat on the floor scrolling through his phone again. Lauren looked up. "Did you talk to the buyers people?" she asked. Christian nodded. "They gave us 3 days." Lauren stared at him. "That's it, yes?" She let out a quiet breath of disbelief. "This is insane." Christian did not argue. Instead, he poured coffee and stood near the window overlooking the Pacific. The waves moved with the same quiet persistence they always had. Lauren watched him carefully. "You're taking this too calmly," she said. Christian turned slightly. "What do you expect me to do? Fight back," she said. Christian shook his head again. "I told you already. Legally, the sale is clean." Lauren stepped closer. "But Paula did this behind your back." Christian did not answer. Instead, he reached for the folder Daniel Reeves had given him the previous afternoon. Inside were several additional documents Paula had compiled. Financial records, expense reports. Christian opened one of the pages. Restaurant receipts, hotel charges, boat rentals. Each entry carried dates and locations. Maui. Lauren noticed the documents immediately. "What are those?" Christian slid the page across the counter. Lauren scanned it quickly. Her expression changed. "Why does she have these?" Christian leaned back against the counter. "Because she collected them." Lauren looked uncomfortable. "But why?" Christian didn't respond immediately. Instead, he flipped to another page. A timeline Daniel had assembled from Paula's documentation. April 9th, Christian departure claimed Aspen. April 9th, flight LAX. Maui confirmed. April 10th, 15, multiple travel expenses associated with Lauren Carter. Lauren's name appeared several times. She closed the folder slowly. "So she was spying on you?" Christian looked up. "No." Lauren frowned. "What do you mean, no?" Christian tapped the receipts. "These came from my own accounts." Lauren's expression tightened slightly. "So she just checked them?" "Yes." Lauren crossed her arms. "That's still invasive." Christian remained silent, because the truth was becoming increasingly difficult to avoid. Paula had not hacked anything. She had not invaded private accounts. The financial records existed within the household systems they had shared for years. Christian had simply assumed she would never pay attention. Lauren spoke again, her voice lower now. "Is she going to use this against us?" Christian closed the folder. "She hasn't yet." Lauren looked uneasy. "But she could." Christian nodded slightly. "Yes." Later that afternoon, Christian met Daniel again, briefly by phone. "I reviewed the financial records you mentioned," Christian said. Daniel answered calmly. "Paula hasn't filed any legal claims." "For now?" "Yes." Christian stared out the window. "So, what happens next?" Daniel hesitated. "That depends on how you handle the transition." "What does that mean?" "It means if everyone moves forward quietly," Daniel said, "there's no reason for the documentation to become part of a larger legal conflict." Christian understood the implication. If he challenged Paula publicly, the receipts, the timeline, Lauren's name, all of it could become evidence. Paula anticipated that, Christian said quietly. Daniel did not deny it. "She documented carefully," he replied. Christian rubbed his forehead. "So the best option is," what Daniel answered simply, "move on." Christian almost laughed again. Move on. 16 years of marriage, 12 years in the house overlooking the Pacific, $20 million changing hands. And the solution was simply to move on. But as uncomfortable as it sounded, Daniel was right. There was no legal path backward. That evening, the Malibu house felt unusually hollow. Most of Lauren's belongings were already packed. Denise had arranged transportation back to Los Angeles the next morning. Ethan sat on the terrace steps, watching the waves. Christian joined him outside. "You like the ocean?" Christian asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's better than the city." Christian leaned against the railing. "You surfed in Maui, right?" Ethan smiled. "Lauren signed me up for lessons." Christian nodded slowly. The surf school receipt Paula had saved flashed briefly through his mind. Even that small detail had been recorded. Ethan looked toward the house behind them. "Are you sad we have to leave?" the boy asked. Christian thought about the question carefully. "Not sad," he said, "just surprised." Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer. He returned to watching the waves. Christian remained there for a while longer. The ocean had always represented stability to him, something larger than business deals, larger than property ownership. But now, he understood something different. The house had never been the true structure supporting his life. The real structure had been the quiet systems Paula maintained. Legal frameworks, documentation, financial oversight. He had ignored those systems for years. And when the time came, Paula had simply used them. Far north along the California coast, Paula Whitaker stood on the porch of a small rented house overlooking another stretch of Pacific shoreline. Carmel by the sea was quieter than Malibu. The streets were narrow, the buildings older. The ocean here felt colder, the wind sharper against the cliffs. Paula held a mug of tea as she watched the tide move slowly against the rocks. Inside the house, a small stack of boxes sat neatly against the wall. The preservation notebooks from Malibu rested on a nearby table. Her phone vibrated gently, a message from Sophia Martinez. The transition appears to be proceeding smoothly. Mr. Brooks will visit the property Monday. Paula typed a short reply. Thank you. She placed the phone down again. For several minutes, she simply listened to the sound of the ocean. She did not think about Christian, not about Maui, not about Lauren Carter. Those details had already served their purpose. Instead, Paula focused on the quiet rhythm of the waves. Structures she knew did not last forever. But when one ended, another could always begin. And this time, the structure of her life would be entirely her own. By the second morning after the sale, the Whitaker house felt less like a home and more like a stage after the audience had left. The furniture remained where it had always been. The long dining table still faced the ocean through the glass walls. The stone floors Paula had restored still reflected the early light moving in from the Pacific. But the life that once moved naturally through those spaces had already begun to disappear. Christian Whitaker stood in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty cabinet. For years, he had never paid attention to what was stored there. Paula had always handled the details: grocery supplies, the quiet rhythm of maintaining a household. Now the shelves were almost bare. Lauren entered the room, carrying another suitcase. "We're nearly done upstairs," she said. Christian nodded. He had spent most of the night reviewing the documents Daniel had sent again. The legal language remained frustratingly clear. The sale was valid. The authority clause remained binding. Paula had followed every rule. Lauren watched him for a moment. "You're still thinking about it," she said. Christian didn't deny it. She planned everything. Lauren leaned against the counter. "So what if she did? That doesn't mean you should just accept it." Christian looked at her. "I don't have a choice." Lauren shook her head. "There's always a choice." Christian exhaled slowly. "You're not understanding the situation? Then explain it to me." Christian picked up the folder again and opened to the timeline Daniel had assembled. He slid it across the counter. Lauren read silently. The list was longer than she expected. Dates, transactions, charges tied to Maui. Her name appeared several times. Lauren Carter. Surf lessons for Ethan. Restaurant reservations. Boat excursions. Her face tightened slightly as she finished reading. She tracked everything Lauren said quietly. "Yes." Lauren looked up. "That's obsessive." Christian shook his head. "No." Lauren frowned. "What do you mean, no?" Christian tapped the page. "These are financial records." Lauren looked uneasy. But why would she keep them? Christian did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the kitchen again. Because Paula Whitaker had always kept records. Of the house, of the renovations, of their finances. He had treated that habit like a harmless quirk. But now he understood something he had overlooked for years. Paula hadn't been collecting memories. She had been preserving structures. And when the structure of their marriage began to collapse, she had simply documented that collapse as well. Lauren folded the paper back into the folder. "So what now?" she asked. Christian closed the folder. "Now we leave." Later that afternoon, Christian received another call from David Lynn at Brooks Holdings, Mr. Whitaker. Lynn said politely, "I wanted to confirm the timeline for vacating the property." Christian stood in the study as he spoke, looking at the empty shelves where Paula's notebooks had once been stored. "We'll be out tomorrow," he said. "Thank you," Lynn replied. Christian hesitated briefly before asking a question. "Has Brooks said anything about the house?" Lynn paused. "He appreciates the restoration work," he said. "He intends to preserve the structure." Christian nodded slowly. That sounded like Paula's influence again. Even in selling the house, she had ensured its future. After ending the call, Christian walked through the hallway toward the living room. Lauren and Denise were sealing the final boxes. Ethan sat on the floor near the terrace doors, watching waves crash against the rocks below. Lauren looked up. "Was that the buyer?" "Yes, and we leave tomorrow." Lauren sighed. Everything happened so fast. Christian almost smiled. For him, the process had been sudden. For Paula, it had taken weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. Lauren approached him again. "There's something I still don't understand," she said. Christian waited. Why didn't she confront you? Christian considered the question. He had asked himself the same thing several times since reading her letter. Paula had never raised her voice, never accused him, never demanded explanations about Maui. She had simply acted. "I think she already knew the answers," Christian said quietly. Lauren looked at him. "That's not normal." Christian shrugged. Paula was never normal. That evening, the house stood nearly empty. The last boxes were stacked near the front door. Christian walked once more out onto the terrace. The ocean was dark now, the horizon barely visible beneath a thin band of moonlight. He leaned against the balcony railing where Nathaniel Brooks had stood only a week earlier. At the time, Christian had been thousands of miles away in Maui. Laughing, relaxing, believing nothing important had changed. The irony was difficult to ignore. While he had been enjoying the trip, Paula had been signing documents, finalizing escrow, transferring ownership of the house he believed would always belong to him. Behind him, the sliding glass doors opened. Lauren stepped outside. "You okay?" she asked. Christian nodded, just thinking. Lauren moved beside him. "You'll build something else," she said. Christian glanced toward the house behind them. For years, that had been exactly how he approached life. Properties were assets. Structures could be replaced. But now, he understood something he hadn't before. The Whitaker house had never just been an asset. It had been the place where his life with Paula existed. And that life had ended long before the house was sold. Lauren spoke again. "Where do we go after this?" Christian looked out at the ocean. "Los Angeles," he said. Lauren hesitated, and Paula Christian shook his head. "She's already gone." Hundreds of miles north, Paula Whitaker walked along the rocky shoreline outside Carmel by the sea. The morning fog had begun to lift, revealing long stretches of gray-blue water. The small house she had rented stood on a quiet bluff above the beach. It was not large, but it was peaceful. The air smelled of salt and pine trees instead of traffic and luxury developments. Paula carried one of her old preservation notebooks under her arm. She had begun reviewing the pages again, not because she missed the Malibu house, but because the documentation reminded her of something important. Structures changed, but the work invested in them remained part of their history. Her phone vibrated softly in her pocket. Another message from Sophia Martinez. "The new owner arrives at the property tomorrow. Everything is proceeding smoothly." Paula read the message and placed the phone back in her pocket. The ocean wind moved steadily across the cliffs. For the first time in years, the quiet around her felt completely her own. No documents to organize for Christian's projects, no schedules built around his travel. Just the sound of waves and the steady rhythm of a life she had chosen herself. Back in Malibu, Christian Whitaker stood inside the empty living room of the house that had once carried his name. And for the first time since he stepped off the plane from Maui, he understood something clearly. Paula Whitaker had not destroyed his life. She had simply walked away from a structure that no longer respected her place within it. Christian Whitaker woke before sunrise on the final morning in the Malibu house. The rooms were quiet now, emptier than they had ever been. The echo of his footsteps carried across the stone floors as he walked from the bedroom toward the living room. Most of the furniture had already been moved out. The movers would arrive later that morning to collect the remaining boxes. For a long moment, he simply stood in the center of the living room. The wide windows still framed the Pacific in the pale gray light of early morning. Waves rolled slowly toward the cliff below, the same rhythm that had filled this house every day for more than a decade. Christian had watched those waves countless times, after investor dinners, after long negotiations, after celebrations when a development deal closed successfully. But this morning felt different. Because the house no longer belonged to him. He walked slowly across the room and pushed open the terrace door. Cold ocean air moved through the space. Christian stepped outside. For years, this balcony had felt like the center of his world. Now it felt like the final page of a chapter he had never expected to end. Behind him, the sound of a suitcase zipper broke the silence. Lauren stepped onto the terrace. "You've been up a while," she said. Christian nodded. Couldn't sleep. Lauren leaned against the railing beside him. "So this is really it?" Christian looked toward the ocean. "Yes." Lauren hesitated. "You still haven't heard from Paula?" Christian shook his head. "No." Lauren studied his expression carefully. "Does that bother you?" Christian didn't answer immediately. What bothered him wasn't Paula's silence. It was the realization that her silence had always been there. For years, Paula had watched, observed, documented. And while he had mistaken that quiet for passivity, she had simply been gathering the information she needed. Lauren spoke again. She could at least explain herself. Christian gave a faint smile. "I think she already did." Lauren frowned. When Christian remembered the letter Paula had left in the study, the house was never meant to become a place where respect disappeared. That sentence had stayed with him, not because it accused him, but because it described something he had never noticed happening. Lauren shook her head slightly. "I still don't understand how someone just walks away like that." Christian looked back toward the empty living room. She didn't just walk away. Lauren waited. She prepared. Later that morning, the moving truck arrived. 2 workers carried the final boxes from the house and loaded them into the vehicle waiting in the driveway. Denise Carter stood near the car, watching quietly while Ethan leaned against the railing, looking down toward the ocean. Lauren supervised the last items being packed. Christian remained inside the house a little longer. He walked through each room one final time. The kitchen, the hallway, the library where Paula had once kept dozens of preservation books. Every space carried traces of the careful restoration she had overseen. It had taken her years to rebuild the house into what it was now. And in less than a month, she had arranged its sale. Christian paused at the doorway of the study. The desk where Paula once worked stood empty. Only the faint outline of where her notebooks had been stacked remained visible in the dust. For the first time since the sale, Christian allowed himself to imagine what Paula must have felt during those final weeks. Watching him leave for Maui, seeing the financial records appear, knowing what they meant. And instead of arguing or confronting him, she had opened a folder, created a timeline, called a lawyer, met a broker, negotiated a sale, executed the documents, then packed her belongings and left. The precision of it unsettled him, not because it was cruel, but because it was calm. Most endings were chaotic. This one had been methodical. Christian walked back toward the living room. Lauren appeared in the doorway. "The truck's ready," she said. Christian nodded. They stepped outside together. The movers closed the truck doors with a loud metallic sound. Lauren's SUV waited behind it, the trunk already full. Christian turned back toward the house one last time. The windows reflected the morning sunlight across the ocean. Nothing about the structure itself had changed, but its meaning had. Lauren followed his gaze. "It's strange," she said quietly. "What is it? Still looks like your house." Christian smiled faintly. "Yes, but it wasn't." A black car appeared at the end of the driveway, then slowly approaching along the coastal road. It stopped near the gate. A tall man stepped out. Nathaniel Brooks. Christian recognized him immediately from photos Daniel had shown him. Brooks walked calmly up the driveway toward them. David Lynn followed a few steps behind. When Brooks reached the terrace steps, he paused respectfully. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. Christian nodded. "Mr. Brooks." There was no hostility in Brooks's expression, only a quiet professionalism. "I appreciate your cooperation during the transition," Brooks said. Christian shrugged slightly. "It's your house now." Brooks glanced briefly toward the ocean. "Yes." He seemed to take a moment to study the structure. "The restoration work here is extraordinary," he added. Christian nodded. "Paula handled most of that." Brooks looked back at him. "I know." The statement hung quietly between them. Christian studied Brooks carefully. "You met her?" Brooks nodded once, briefly. Christian almost asked where Paula had gone. But he stopped himself, because something told him Brooks would not answer. And even if he did, Christian was no longer certain he had the right to ask. Lauren stepped forward, then impatient. "Are we done here?" she asked. Christian glanced at her, then back at Brooks. "Yes," he said. He picked up the final bag from the ground and walked toward the car. Lauren followed. Ethan climbed into the back seat. Denise settled into the passenger seat beside Christian. Before closing the door, Christian looked once more toward the terrace. Nathaniel Brooks stood there now, facing the ocean. Exactly where Paula had once stood so many evenings. Exactly where Christian himself had stood earlier that morning. But now, the structure belonged to someone else. Christian started the engine. The car rolled slowly down the long coastal driveway. As it reached the road, the Whitaker house disappeared behind the curve of the cliffs. And with it, the life Christian Whitaker had assumed would never change. The road north from Malibu followed the coastline for miles, tracing the edge of cliffs where the Pacific rolled endlessly against the land. Christian Whitaker drove in silence. Lauren had stopped asking questions sometime after they left the house. Ethan leaned against the window in the back seat, half asleep, the ocean flashing in brief blue glimpses between rocky curves of the road. For a long time, no one spoke. Christian kept his hands steady on the wheel, though his mind moved through the events of the past week with unusual clarity. The sale, the documents, Paula's letter, Nathaniel Brooks standing on the terrace as if he had always belonged there. 16 years of marriage had ended without an argument, without a confrontation, without even a raised voice. It had ended with paperwork. And Christian realized something he had never fully understood before. Paula had never been someone who fought loudly. She fought by understanding systems better than the people who believed they controlled them. Lauren finally broke the silence. "So where exactly are we going?" she asked. "Los Angeles," Christian replied. Lauren frowned slightly. "That's not very specific." Christian shrugged. "I'll arrange something temporary." Lauren looked out the window. For how long, Christian did not answer. The truth was, he had no immediate plan. Most of his business meetings took place in Los Angeles anyway. Hotels were easy. Apartments could be rented within days. But those solutions felt strangely hollow compared to the structure of the life he had just left behind. Lauren spoke again more cautiously. And after that, Christian glanced briefly toward her. "After that, we see what happens." Lauren's expression tightened slightly. She seemed to realize something at that moment. Christian's world had just been dismantled in a way she had not expected. And when foundations collapse, the people standing near them sometimes lose their footing too. Back in Malibu, Nathaniel Brooks remained on the terrace for a long time after Christian's car disappeared down the coastal road. The house was quiet now. David Lynn stood nearby reviewing documents on his tablet. "The transition appears complete," Lynn said. Brooks nodded slightly. His eyes remained fixed on the ocean. "The restoration work here is exceptional," he said. Lynn glanced around the terrace. "Yes, the previous owner's wife handled most of the preservation." Brooks nodded again. "I met her briefly." Lynn looked up. "Miss Whitaker, yes." Brooks leaned against the balcony rail, studying the structure behind him. "She understood the house," he said quietly. Lynn said nothing. Brooks continued. "Most people see property as square footage and resale value." "And she didn't," Brooks shook his head. "She saw history." The wind moved gently through the open terrace doors. Brooks stepped inside and walked slowly through the living room. The original beams above the ceiling caught the light. The restored tiles carried subtle variations in color that only careful craftsmanship could produce. "This house survived nearly a century," Brooks said. Lynn nodded. And now Brooks smiled faintly. "Now it continues." Far north along the California coast, Paula Whitaker sat at a small wooden desk inside the rented house in Carmel by the sea. The room overlooked another stretch of Pacific shoreline, wilder than Malibu, with darker rocks and colder waves breaking against them. Her preservation notebooks were stacked neatly beside the window. She had begun reviewing them again over the past few days, not because she intended to revisit the Malibu house, but because the work she had done there reminded her of something she valued. Structures mattered, but so did knowing when a structure no longer served its purpose. Paula opened her laptop. An email waited from Daniel Reeves. "The transition appears to have been completed without issue. Brooks Holdings confirmed possession of the property this morning." Paula read the message once. Then she closed the laptop. Outside the window, the wind moved steadily through the tall coastal grass. For the first time in years, there was no legal document waiting for her attention. No renovation report, no financial record tied to Christian's business. Just quiet. She walked outside onto the small porch. The Pacific stretched gray and endless beneath the fog, lifting slowly from the water. Paula wrapped her coat more tightly around herself against the wind. She did not feel victorious. She did not feel regret. What she felt was something quieter. Completion. The structure of her marriage had ended. But unlike many endings, this one had not destroyed her. It had simply released her. Late that evening, Christian checked into a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The room overlooked rows of glass towers glowing with city lights. Lauren placed her suitcase near the bed and sat down slowly. "This is different," she said. Christian nodded. "Yes." Lauren studied him carefully. "You're still thinking about her." Christian didn't deny it. He poured himself a glass of water from the small hotel bottle. "She built that house," he said quietly. Lauren frowned. "You bought it?" "Yes, but she restored it." Lauren leaned back against the pillows. "So what does that mean?" Christian looked out the window at the city skyline. "It means she understood something I didn't." Lauren waited. Christian turned slightly toward her. "You can own something legally," he said, "and still not understand what holds it together." Lauren said nothing, because the truth in that sentence was difficult to argue. Christian placed the glass on the table beside the bed. For the first time since the sale, he stopped thinking about legal strategies or financial consequences. Instead, he thought about the quiet way Paula had walked through the house during their marriage, checking repairs, documenting renovations, keeping records no one else cared about. She had always been protecting something. And when that protection was no longer possible, she had simply moved on. Lauren spoke softly from the bed. "What happens now?" Christian looked back at the city lights. "Now," he said slowly, "we start over." But the words sounded less certain than he intended. Because starting over was easy for buildings, for businesses, for development projects. People, however, were more complicated. And somewhere along the rugged northern coast of California, Paula Whitaker had already begun building a life that no longer depended on him at all. Several weeks passed after the Whitaker house changed ownership. In Malibu, Life continued almost exactly as it always had. The Pacific still moved steadily against the cliffs. Coastal fog still rolled across the hills in the early mornings. Cars still followed the narrow road along the water where the Whitaker driveway curved out of sight. The only difference was the name attached to the property. Nathaniel Brooks did not change much when he took possession of the house. The restoration Paula Whitaker had overseen remained untouched. The original beams still crossed the ceiling. The stone floors still carried the faint marks of nearly a century of footsteps. Even the garden paths Paula had redesigned remained the same. Brooks had only one instruction for the staff he hired to maintain the property. Preserve it, he told them. Nothing more. In Los Angeles, Christian Whitaker's life moved forward with the kind of restless energy he had always relied on. Business meetings filled his days again. Development projects continued. Investors still called. From the outside, little appeared to have changed. But something subtle had shifted. Christian no longer spoke about Malibu, not about the house, not about the terrace overlooking the Pacific. Lauren noticed the change gradually. They had moved into a modern apartment overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Glass walls replaced the ocean view. City lights replaced the sound of waves. One evening, Lauren stood near the window, watching traffic far below. "You're working more than usual," she said. Christian sat at the dining table, reviewing documents for a development project in Santa Monica. "That's normal." Lauren crossed her arms. "No, it isn't." Christian looked up. Lauren studied his face carefully. "You're trying not to think about it." Christian knew what she meant. "The house?" he asked. "Yes." Christian closed the folder in front of him. For a moment, he simply sat there, the quiet hum of the city rising through the glass walls around them. "It wasn't really about the house," he said finally. Lauren frowned. "Then what was it about?" Christian leaned back in the chair. "For years, I thought I understood how everything in my life worked." Lauren waited. "I built companies," Christian continued. "Negotiated contracts, managed investments." He looked down briefly at his hands. "But Paula understood the parts I ignored." Lauren did not respond, because she already knew the truth in those words. Christian spoke again. "She didn't argue with me. She didn't fight." Lauren nodded slightly. "That's what makes it so strange." Christian shook his head. "No." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "No." Christian looked out toward the distant city lights. "She didn't need to fight." Hundreds of miles north, the morning fog drifted slowly away from the cliffs of Carmel by the sea. Paula Whitaker walked along the narrow beach path just below her rented house. The Pacific looked different here than it did in Malibu. The waves were stronger, the shoreline rougher. Large, dark rocks stood scattered along the sand like old monuments carved by wind and water. Paula carried a small notebook with her as she walked. Not one of the preservation journals from the Malibu house. A new one. The pages inside it were still mostly blank. She stopped near a flat stone overlooking the water and sat down. The wind pulled lightly at her coat. For the first time in years, there was no schedule waiting for her. No contractor meetings, no property inspections, no legal documents to review. The silence felt unfamiliar at first. But slowly, it began to feel peaceful. Paula opened the notebook. On the first page, she had written only one sentence. "Structures are meant to hold what is valued." She looked at the words for a moment. Then she added another line beneath them. "When the value disappears, the structure must change." Paula closed the notebook again. Somewhere far down the coastline, the sun broke through the remaining fog, casting light across the water. She watched the waves for several minutes, not thinking about Christian, not thinking about the house. Those things had already become part of the past. Instead, Paula focused on the steady rhythm of the ocean, a rhythm that existed long before Malibu houses or legal documents or quiet marriages that slowly lost their balance. Her phone vibrated softly in her pocket. A message from Sophia Martinez. "I thought you might like to know the new owner has decided to keep the restoration exactly as you designed it." Paula read the message once. Then she typed a short reply. "I'm glad." She slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine from the cliffs above. For the first time in many years, Paula Whitaker felt no need to observe or record anything around her. She had already done what was necessary. She had protected what mattered. And when that protection was no longer possible, she had simply stepped away with her dignity intact. The ocean continued its endless motion beneath the morning light. And somewhere far behind her, along the California coast, the Whitaker house still stood overlooking the Pacific. No longer as a symbol of a marriage that had quietly ended, but as a preserved structure ready for whatever history would come next. When stories like this end, they rarely end with shouting or dramatic victories. More often, they end the way Paula Whitaker's story did, quietly, not because nothing happened, but because the most important changes had already taken place long before anyone realized. Paula never argued in the living room. She never tried to embarrass Christian in front of anyone. She didn't deliver speeches or demand apologies. Instead, she observed. She documented. She understood the systems that shaped her life, legal, financial, emotional. And when those systems stopped protecting her dignity, she adjusted them. The house was never the real point of the story. The $20 million was never the real victory. The real moment of power came earlier when Paula realized she did not need to shout in order to reclaim control of her life. Sometimes the strongest response is not revenge. It is simply leaving with clarity, preparation, and dignity. If this story made you reflect on the quiet strength people sometimes carry for years without being noticed, take a moment to share where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Stories travel in interesting ways, across cities, across oceans, across quiet evenings, where someone might need to hear that dignity can survive even the most complicated endings. And if you appreciate stories about patience, truth, and the quiet ways justice sometimes unfolds, you're always welcome to follow the channel so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for spending this time with Paula Whitaker's story.